and I'm about to offer some information data that's somewhat a running theme, and that is that I'm looking at macronutrients, and the macronutrients are fat, protein, and carbohydrate. And everybody is somewhat obsessed about protein and the necessity of it and whether or not we get enough. I'm kind of the mindset that those that are entrenched in the belief that the only place that we should or could be getting the proper nourishment is through animal products are determined to put that out there as the reason that plant-based is not a very good idea. And we'll hopefully dispel that. Is accept your past, take control of your future, and find vibrant health, balance, and joy. If you have read my book, you know that from the time I was 15 until really, even though there was some off and on in there, until I finally tackled it at 67 years old, I had an eating disorder. And it began at 15 because as I was filling out, I was always a skinny kid. I decided that the best way to stop filling out, because the comments were coming in, wow, you're filling out, was to stop eating. Well, that leads to all kinds of dysregulation. And then I started binging and purging, and that just went on and on. And it went on and on entirely too long. But I found a relief from that, and it's been almost 3 years now. And I talk about that in my book, but I will give credit to two things. One was that I read Catherine Hanson's book, Brain Over Binge. Do I have that here? Oh, it's in the other room. I was just talking to a client about it. And the other is a statement that she made: you must eat adequately in order to, I'm going to say, learn to get past the urges, because, well, I'm not going to get into all of this. I'm way off track right now. In any case, you must eat adequately, and that's what I found. But going through those years of Atkins back in the 70s, if you want to be healthy and you want to be thin, you've got to eat protein and fat and stay away from the carbs. Carbs was like death. And it's still like that. I'm amazed by the number of people that still believe that carbohydrates make you fat. So we're going to do a deep dive into that. But before we do, you're going to hear me talk about fiber, because all plants have fiber, and all plants, nearly all plants, are mainly carbohydrate, and yet plants also have those other two macronutrients, protein and fat. As a matter of fact, almost every plant has protein, and many plants have fat, and all plants have a degree of fiber. That's the cellulose that creates their cells. But one of the things that when I talk about fiber, I will almost always bring up is something that was so beautifully illustrated in terms of the value of it. I want to get this straight. And that's Will Bolshevitz's book, Fiber Fueled. He is a board certified gastroenterologist. He also embraces lifestyle medicine, and I am a lifestyle medicine health and wellness coach with Lifestyle Medical here in Riverside, California, and we have a family or a general practice office in Redlands, California as well. He is also a lifestyle medical doctor who embraces plant-based eating, because when he became ill during medical school and he started doing a deep dive into health, all of the research went back to the value of eating plants. He adopted a heavily plant-based diet, then an exclusively plant-based diet, and that was the end of the maladies. He's big and he's buff and he's smart. He also has a graduate degree in nutritional science, so he is a researcher, and he wrote this beautiful book last May of 2020. Value, but it doesn't do what fiber is supposed to do, and that is to feed the microbiome. So what makes a plant-based diet magical? It's the fiber. But we'll get to that as well. I wanted to read you something that he said in his book, Fiber Fueled. We live in a country with a pathologic protein obsession. Meanwhile, we are figuratively and literally starving for fiber. Less than 3% of Americans get enough fiber, even at the recommended level, let alone the optimal level. And I agree with that. And it affects everything in our body. And you might say, well, but Nan, a plant-based diet couldn't be complete. I even have a comment on the page that promoted this Facebook Live, and the question was, but Nan, if I can't eat beans, how am I going to get my protein? Because where do you get your beans on a plant-based, where do you get your fiber on a plant-based diet? Is that what I wanted to ask? Where do you get your protein on a plant-based diet? Let me put it that way. You get it from beans, you get it from grains, you get it from tubers. Probably tubers are potatoes. Potatoes are one of the lowest plant species, genus, in protein, and yet they have 10% of the 10% by calories of their caloric value comes from protein. The rest is carbohydrate, very, very little fat. So in other words, if we can survive as a species on 10% protein, as a matter of fact, that's recommended, anywhere from 5 to 10%, some people keep it up maybe to 15%. There are a lot of people who are eating 30 and 40% protein, and quite often mainly from animal sources, and that's where we're starting to see so much problem as it relates to chronic diseases, because the protein is highly inflammatory and encourages cellular growth. That might be fine for a baby or a teenager or a younger kid. That's not fine when we've stopped growing and we have IGF-1 insulin-like growth factor pushing cellular growth. We don't want that, and we get it from animal protein. The plant proteins, phytoproteins, are much milder in that way. We don't get that cellular proliferation that we would get from the animal protein, but that's not what I'm talking about today. That was back in my protein, I'll call it workshop, that you'll also find from my YouTube live, what was that, the March 18th? Or maybe it was the 25th. Today we're talking about carbohydrates, and I can't talk about the value of a plant-based diet without talking about the value of carbohydrates, because all plants have carbohydrates. None of them are 100% let's say any other nutrient. Beans are high in protein, but still mainly carbohydrate. Coconut, and that's become the darling in these last few years with throwing up coconut butter and coffee and all of that. Coconut is 85% saturated fat. Saturated fat is not good for us. And so coconut is one of the, and a lot of seeds and nuts are the highest of the plant kingdom in fat. But they also have protein. And the fat in nuts and seeds, especially seeds like flax seeds, are very high in omega-3 omega-3s, omega-6s, but mainly omega-3, which is what we're going for to furnish our essential fatty acids. I talked about that in my fat Facebook Live, all about fats and what's important in our diet. So let me stick with the questions that I asked as an outline to this talk today. What are carbs? More properly, carbohydrates. Some people, especially scientists, hate that word carbs. It's carbohydrates. And I said that. They are they are what plants are primarily, and they are comprised of all right, they're comprised of cellular walls and growing elements. For example, the thylakoids in green plants are actually the little manufacturers that turn sun energy, photosynthesis, sun energy into plant energy. Those thylakoids affect us in a marvelous way. They damp down hunger. They make fat metabolism easier, which is a good thing. We want it to move on through. And but all plants have a combination of the fats, carbohydrate, and protein. And if potato, it has the lowest amount of protein of most of the plants at 10%. Broccoli, for example, has 30% by weight of protein, but we're not going to have quite that much broccoli. We can eat a pound of broccoli for 100 calories, which that's one of the reasons that I avoid adding oils. That's one of the reasons. That's back in that talk as well. Tablespoon of oil is 120 calories. I'd rather eat a pound of broccoli. I probably am not going to get through that, but I'm sure going to get a lot of nutrients as I'm going through that, any amount of broccoli. But the protein is there, and that's what I'm trying to say. So the way we talked about, I'll summarize. The way we talked about protein in the plant community is if you're getting enough, because there is protein in all plants, even potatoes, which is one of the lowest at 10%, and 10% of protein is healthy. 10% of your calories from protein is a healthy level. Then if you're getting enough calories to maintain your weight, you're getting enough protein. As a matter of fact, quite often people are getting more protein than they need. So we're going to leave that aside. But what makes carbohydrates so important? First of all, they're our body's preferred fuel. They break down, the glucose is our body's preferred fuel, and carbohydrates supply glucose. The thing is that there are good carbohydrates and bad, and that's the next question and the next thing that is so important for me to break down for you. When I adopted a whole food plant-based diet, which was in almost mid 2018, I had just tackled the end of my struggle with my eating disorder. And I knew I needed a diet that was going to support it. And actually, this actually played a big part of it. That is that when you're eating whole food, plant-based, and you're eating a lot of carbohydrates, you're probably going to be eating 65 to 70% of your calories in carbohydrates. I easily do. Those foods are nature's antidepressants and and appetite suppressants. In other words, carbohydrates calm us down. They mediate blood sugar spikes. They, but you know what? I'm missing a word there, and I'll finish that sentence. They mediate blood sugar spikes. They nourish us with the vitamins and minerals and nutrients, phytochemicals that we haven't even identified yet. All of those come from plants. The fiber that are in plants, and again, almost all plants have fiber, feed what Dr. Bolshevitz brought to everybody's attention, and that is the microbiome. And the microbiome has everything to do with the development of short chain fatty acids that have everything to do with mediating systems throughout our body. And the short chain fatty acids even affect our cognition, as well as our neurotransmitters like dopamine, serotonin, epinephrine. All of those are mediated to a degree by the microbiome, especially serotonin. Anyway, the carbohydrates that I'm talking about here, though, are not what so many people view as a carb, and that is the processed carbohydrates, the unrefined carbohydrates, because they're not a whole food. When people ask, or I'm talking about my diet or the diet that I work with patients and clients on, and the diet that the College of Lifestyle Medicine embraces, we're talking about whole food, plant-based. I'm not saying vegan. And what I mean by that is we're going as animal free as possible, because the animal proteins do elicit the insulin like growth factor, something called TMAO, which can down the line of metabolites be a stimulator of and a carcinogen, and that is only from animal proteins. We're not talking about that. What we're talking about is, and as it relates to, again, carbohydrates, what we're talking about is foods that are, as opposed to vegan, which just means no meat, we're talking about whole foods, as close to nature as possible. That's why I describe my diet not as a philosophical determination, i.e. vegan. I'm talking about, because many vegans eat a lot of cruddy food. They eat a lot of manufactured vegan food that is as high in fat, it may not be animal fat, but as high in fat and quite often as processed as much of what we pick up in bags that are not vegan. They're, again, it's a very popular manufacturing byword, and that is vegan. People will pick it up thinking it's healthy, and that's not the case at all. So I talk about whole food, plant-based, as does the College of Lifestyle Medicine. That means as close to nature as possible with as little processing as possible. There's processed foods, there's ultra processed foods. Processed foods, you can still tell what the food was supposed to be. For example, if I get, and I do, eat organic corn tortillas, whole grain, organic corn tortillas, gluten-free, all of that, simply because I can't have the gluten. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with wheat if you can have it, because that's a whole grain if you eat it in that way. The tortilla is ground up corn. That's processed, but it's minimally processed. On the other hand, even a corn chip is somewhat the original ground up and formed, but after that, then they start adding things like the fat that it's fried in, and that is altered by the heat, and it's calorically very different than that ground up corn pressed into a patty, the way a tortilla is. And so for that reason, I encourage people to look at, as often as we can, getting all of our plant foods, again, as close to nature as possible. Let me have an apple rather than even a dried apple strip, even though that might be next in line. Certainly better than a apple flavored protein or energy bar that, when you start reading, it has a lot of things done to it, including stabilizers and additional chemicals. So we're looking for unrefined carbohydrates. If you look at if you came to this from Facebook and the promotional piece for my Facebook talk today, you'll see that I had some photos of picture or of foods at the top of the screen. I don't know if you can really see that very well. That was a burger. This is mashed potatoes with sauteed, and when I say sauteed, because I don't use additional oil, I just mean um, broth sauteed. Start in a hot pan with your onion or your shallot, let it weep a little, put the mushrooms in, and continue to work with them until they sort of dry out their juices and start to stick a little, and then you add a little bit of broth, and you keep doing that, and that's called a dry saute, and you get fabulous flavor with no additional fat. And that's what you're looking at when you look at the mashed potatoes. And then another pan of a bean a bean dish, and then another photo which is an apple cake. And you might say, aha, so that dessert is a refined product. No, I'll still have that, because you know what that apple cake is made of, and if you want the recipe for it, you can find my recipes at nansimonson.com, Nansimonsen, nansimonson.com. In my recipe section, that apple cake is there. It comes from Chef AJ. She's brilliant with her desserts, and she is completely plant-based and SOS free, which means salt, oil, and sugar free. I still sneak in a little bit of salt once in a while. I keep the oil away, and I don't eat processed sugar. So what that cake is, it's called triple apple cake, is oats, just oatmeal, but the rolled oats, apple slices, dried apple slices, that's minimally processed, whole apples chopped, and apple sauce. That's just apples cooked down. I even make my own quite often. And I add some walnuts to it because I like nuts, and they are some additional protein, and I find them really satisfying because I like the crunch. That's it. That's the apple cake. And it's delicious. It's a sweet, and yet it's, by the same token, a whole food. Is not quite as close to nature as an apple would be, but pretty close to it. So I put those up there to show you, if you are considering a whole food diet, if you're considering the value of accepting carbohydrates and lots of them into your diet, and I'm going to call it easing those in and easing some other much more calorically dense foods like meats and fats and processed foods. Bring in those whole foods, bring in the carbohydrates, and don't fear them. For example, a potato is, I don't count calories, and I'm at one of my lowest weights, and I just stay that way eating a whole food plant-based diet, but massive amounts of food. So a typical meal will be perhaps a 3/4 of a pound of sliced potato, or my favorite is a sweet potato called Frida's Stokey's Purple. And it's a purple potato. You can use the Japanese potatoes that are purple on the outside, white on the inside, or the Hana yams that Chef AJ loves, which are white on the inside and outside, and they're really yummy. But a roasted potato, a giant salad, some beans on the side, some perhaps some corn, and then lots and lots of vegetables piled in with chopped greens. That's a perfect meal for me. Last night we did tacos. It was the whole grain tortillas, organic, and a lentil taco seasoned mix. And it was fabulous, spooned onto the tortilla shell with a whole grain brown rice that was flavored with chopped tomatoes and bell pepper. That was the Spanish rice, as I called it, and some avocado and some chopped cabbage and some tomato and steamed broccoli and cauliflower. There was so much food there. It was fabulous. And yet the carbohydrate count on that meal was probably 65-75%. The protein was easily 10 to 15%, and it was a very satisfying meal. That's what eating adequately looks like. Having meals that, like the photo I showed you, which I'm not sure you can see it well, but you can go back on Facebook and look for that promotional piece. The photo included a burger that's a black bean burger I love to make, and it's on my website. Delicious, filling, high protein. It's black beans and uh, flavoring vegetables like onions and garlic. And by the way, those are wonderful for you. Your alliums, some people think that things like onion, because it's white, has no value. Its phytonutrients are in ways that nothing else can match because it is an allium, and again, based on our microbiome, it is I'm sorry, there. Uh, it is different in our system than something else that looks anything like it. If it's an allium, it's going to feed certain bacteria or certain microbes that are in our microbiome and encourage those to take residence. And that's why we want the colors of the rainbow as we eat our carbohydrates, and that becomes a game as well. The American Gut Project, and I'll reiterate, only plants have fiber. The American Gut Project took 10 years to come up with a consensus, and they're still running it, a consensus of the breakdown and value and working of the microbiome. And this fueled Dr. Bolshewitz's book with up-to-date, pure science about the value of plants in our diet, because the microbiome is only fed by fiber. Fiber only comes from plants. And what they found is that the healthiest people in the world are the ones that have the most diverse microbiome. The different foods feed it differently. So if you're thinking, okay, if I can have all the carbohydrate I want by cutting back on highly nutrient dense foods like animal fats, and all, even your chicken breast, which you think is possibly the lowest in fat of the whole chicken, that's still 20 to 30% fat. And part of that is saturated as well. So if you crowd out some of the animal product, cut that back to a little bit, and add more plant product, you're adding more fiber, you're adding more diversity. You've got this rainbow going. That's 30, your goal, and this was actually the consensus of the American Gut Project, is a goal of at least 30 different fruits, vegetables, seeds, nuts, grains, and legumes a week. At least 30 different. You can do that in a day if you have a big salad that has a mixture. Last night's meal, when you count everything that went in it, the sliced green onion, the tomato, the black olives, the avocado, the corn tortillas, the lentils, the onion and garlic, and I think I'm up to almost 10 right now. What else did we put in it? Oh, we had some corn and black bean salsa, some regular red salsa that also had some jalapenos. You see where I'm going with this? Each one of those fed the microbiome differently and better. They're all whole foods. They all make a difference, and they're all healthy, and they're all very filling. So if you were thinking of how to incorporate more plant foods, not gain weight, but have more satisfaction in your meals, have big baked potatoes with black beans and salsa and sour cream, vegan sour cream, which I make, and you'll see that at nansimonson.com, just vegan sour cream. It's just tofu. It's just silken tofu, well seasoned, and it's wonderful. To have a meal like that that fills you up and is satisfying, and put whatever you want on the side if you are not able to give up too much of what you're used to if you eat a mixed diet. But trust that you can add, as long as you're keeping your fat low, because if you take what you're eating now that keeps you at a certain weight and start piling on the carbohydrates, even if they're whole food, plant-based carbohydrates, all of this that I'm talking about, you're going to gain weight. You're adding more calories and not replacing anything. So you crowd out some of the other, you add some of the carbohydrates that'll feed the microbiome, that'll satisfy you, and maybe convince you that carbohydrates can be the way to stabilize your system, to bring about health. Before I began my whole food plant-based diet, and you've heard this if you've heard my story, I had tried a ketogenic diet. My cholesterol was sky high. It was, I think, it was around 230, which is high. I was sent off to a cardiologist. Here, you should take a statin. Rheumatoid arthritis, I hurt everywhere from head to foot. All of my joints were swollen and they hurt. Rheumatologist said you want to take immunosuppressant drugs. My fasting blood sugar was almost 120, which is diabetes. So I was told that I should look at metformin. Was it metformin? What's the other one that you take for diabetes? Anyway, and along the way, the year before that, they said, oh, your gallbladder isn't working well, and my mother had hers out, and some of these things have some genetic components, and you should have your gallbladder taken out. And I simply said no to everything, because that was the beginning of the black hole. That's the beginning. And we look around us, and this is what I wanted to say earlier too. If the standard American diet was so great for us, all this meat, all this cheese, all this dairy, all this protein, this ridiculous amount of protein that people are eating, if it was so good, why are we getting sicker every year? People are getting heavier than they want. They're getting sicker than they've been before. Our lifespan has been reduced by a year or more. Every year for the last 3 years, we're getting sicker, we're getting worse. Those on a plant-based diet epidemiologically have proven that the plant-based diet can keep you alive, healthy, without these chronic diseases into your 80s, 90s, and beyond. Who proves that? The blue zones. The people in the blue zones. Now, part of that is diet, because they are all largely plant-based. The people in the blue zones also have lifestyle medicine that are lifestyle modifications that make all the difference, that are embraced by lifestyle medicine, which is now my background. And that a lot of that is broken down in Aging Powerfully. But let me get back to the foods that we were talking about. To be able to pick up a whole grain bun, one that's full of whole grains of any kind, not white flour, not wheat flour, but whole grains that are full of natural fiber. Sometimes you'll pick up a bar that says it's loaded with fiber. Well, what they did is they just put a bunch of psyllium in it. That's like taking a teaspoon of Metamucil and putting it in there. That's not what you want. You want the whole food. So you have a whole food bun, then you have a black bean burger, then you have a big fat slice of tomato and a bunch of either sprouts or lettuce, and maybe some red onion, and maybe a pickle that you bought that is a fermented pickle, as opposed to one that comes in the jar, one that comes in the refrigerator case, like, Trader Joe's has them. Burpees is another brand. They still have I'll call it mother, the thing that turns it into a fermentation in that jar. Fermented foods feed the microbiome. You put that on your burger, you have a nice whole food plant-based meal that satisfies you. Big pile of mashed potatoes. These mashed potatoes happen to be made with cauliflower and mashed potatoes. And to cream it up and make it really rich tasting, some cashews. Wonderful potatoes. Everybody, my grandkids love them. And we can have piles of them. To be able to have piles of mashed potatoes with piles of sauteed mushroom on it, or I don't know, some kind of a stew on the side, is very satisfying. The other picture, a beautiful soup or stew with all kinds of beans and legumes and lentils, a dessert that is made of whole fruit that is combined in a certain way. It's so satisfying to eat like that. Those are all carbohydrates. The problem is most people, and I'll go back to the state of affairs of our society, or American society, and the standard American diet. Most people have become somewhat hooked on refined, processed carbohydrates. If you're familiar at all with Dr. Doug Lisle and his Pleasure Trap, Goldhammer and Dr. Lisle wrote a book called The Pleasure Trap. One's a psychologist, the other one is a doctor. And the explanation, and this is true, there are, let's see, Michael Pollan, is it Pollan? Yes, Michael Pollan's Salt, Sugar, and Fat. The manufacturers have learned, they actually go out of their way to hire people to combine these highly addictive combinations of foods, especially fats, sugars, and salt. As they make these foods, we get hooked on that combination. So the more processed foods you have, the more things that you buy, like muffins from Costco and bags of chips and food from fast foods. For example, McDonald's hamburger bun has 31 ingredients in it. What the heck? Those are all kinds of flavorings and emulsifiers and things that don't belong in a bun that make you really want more and more and more. And the flavor of the fat, perfect combination from the burger and the bun, make it a so highly palatable that it's hard not to have it. So I'm bringing that up because if you start to transition away from what you're used to, driving through a drive-through with this flavor bomb that hits you, that you've become used to, or the packaged foods that you've become used to, there's a period of rebellion in your body because this is not made up. This is actually the way it works. The microbiome is populated, inhabited by bacteria that has been fed by whatever you're eating. Some people say, I can't eat beans. Well, maybe you can't because you don't have the microbiome to break down the beans properly, to assimilate them, to create the short chain fatty acids, because your microbiome is filled with microbes that are used to a completely different kind of a dietary palette. You may have to start by taking, I mean literally, a teaspoon of beans once a day for a while, and then a tablespoon, and then a quarter of a cup, to begin to populate your gut with something you're not used to. Well, the thing about it is that those hungry bugs, when you stop feeding them, will let you know what they want. Your body will start craving certain things, craving sugar, craving fat, craving salt, and you just have to trust as you move away from that and start eating whole foods that you're going to love the foods even if they don't taste as good to you initially, because you are so used to things that are, I'll use that word again, flavor bombs. The carbohydrates, if you're determined to go toward a diet that satisfies not only your hunger for fullness, because it's very pleasurable to get really nice and comfortably full on a carbohydrate rich meal. It's also very nice not to worry about weight. I don't count calories, and yet my weight is one of the lowest numbers it's been in, well, forever, without effort, and it's just right for me. And yet I eat big amounts. My husband Tim does as well, and he's actually experienced the same thing. He's down about 4 or 5 pounds from what he usually is. Effortlessly, it's just kind of gone away, and that's what happens because your whole foods that are plant-based, if you're not overdoing it on the higher fat foods like the seeds and the nuts and the avocado, you can eat to satisfaction and not gain weight. As a matter of fact, it's just part of one of the reasons that a lot of people go on a whole food plant-based diet. They just lose weight naturally. In any case, if you are transitioning, you will find those things to be true, that you're going to crave some of the stuff that you got used to, that your body will start telling you that it needs it, but it doesn't. You stick it out, You eat to satisfaction in amounts of these carbohydrate foods that will help satisfy your, well, I'll just say the the antidepressant, as well as the I'll call it anti-hunger, um, appetite suppressant, as well as the antidepressant, that will start kind of just sort of nullifying some of that anxiety that you start feeling about what you think you're missing. And before you know it, all of, because again, you're feeding your neurotransmitters, all of your systems kind of take a quieter, almost a more quiescent way of working. Your system just kind of quiets down. And that was the thing that I found as well. After decades of fighting with eating disorders, and that sort of highs and the lows, and the addiction toward the processed foods and the sugars and all, everything quieted down to make it really, really, I'm going to call it simple, to maintain that level of just satisfaction with meals, and without that mentality that people have when they're what we call dieting, always feeling hunger, not feeling like they are eating what they really want to eat, and not being really satisfied long term. Let's see. So the best carbohydrates, as I'm saying, are whole foods that are as close to nature as possible. You learn to make these foods deliciously in all kinds of combinations. And if you go to any one of the social media platforms, you will see one after another of even some really young people promoting whole food, plant-based, and showing you exactly what to do and how to do it. The fun new ones can do these Instagram videos and show you an entire recipe in a minute. You go to mine and I just kind of I drone on and on, kind of like I am now. But that's just the difference. I can't talk that fast, and I can't move that fast, and I don't know all that really cool music they use. But you can, that's one way that you'll find a way to transition. In about a month, I'm going to do a 7-day challenge, and that is a 7-day challenge of going plant-based. There's a app called, it's not an app, it's a online program called Daily OM, Daily OM. And they have a program, 21-day transition to plant-based, that you actually decide how much you're paying for their programs, $15, $35, or $50. I always do the $35, but you can, I actually tested to see if you could do 15, and yeah, you could do 15 for the program. It is beautifully put together. It's one of the best I've seen. They give you they give you education every day, and it's a daily program for 21 days, recipes, shopping lists, encouragement, philosophy. They are whole food, plant-based, the two of them. They're well educated, and they embrace lifestyle medicine. So they encourage you with those 4 pillars of lifestyle medicine to move, meaning getting some exercise, to connect with friends and family, community, which is very important. Resilience, make sure you're getting enough sleep, and ways to de-stress, like meditation, like Tai Chi, like yoga nidra, and nutrition. And I'm talking nutrition now in just one part of it, but that's all part of the of lifestyle modification that can make you as healthy as you want to be, as long as you want to be there, and fight this trend that we're seeing in this country of this sickness that is making people's lives really a slog. And I feel so badly when I look around and I see how unhealthy a lot of our population looks, and it's just not necessary. And they don't have to sacrifice. I feel that those of us and the clients that I work with and the people that are part of lifestyle medicine who have turned, and our medical practice, who have literally turned their lives around physically by doing nothing more than transitioning to a plant-based or largely plant-based diet. The value being the plants, and the more of them, the healthier you are. And therefore, something's going to get crowded out. But with that experience, when I see how people have fixed their, I was going to say miserable lives, and by miserable I mean one of our patients almost lost his leg because of a necrosis that his whole food plant-based diet changed. Changed his weight by 80 pounds. He plays every day now because every part of his body is working really well. So he's physically active, having fun with his wife, and they go into parks and throw frisbees at iron cages. That's called disc golf. And I admire them tremendously. And that's just one example. There are so many. So I can go on, but I've gone on long enough. I hope I've made a point, and that you understand why this is such a passion for me. My purpose of writing Aging Powerfully, my purpose behind this mission to see if I can make a difference, to inspire people to take control of their life, to age powerfully. I don't care if you're watching this at 20 years old. Some people don't want to think of it as aging. Well, then don't. But understand that you're going to someday. It surprised me when I turned 70, and that was a few months ago. You're going to be 70 one day, and you're either going to do it in a decrepit way, or you're going to do it by soaring at 70 and looking at, as I am, the next 10, 20, 30, or who knows how long years. I could hit, as I say, I could get hit by a bus tomorrow, but that's not the point. With that desire and determination, these next 10, 20, 30 years are going to be a hoot. And you can say that at any age you are, because unfortunately, these chronic diseases are starting to hit 30-year-olds and 40s and 50s. We're getting kids with type 2 diabetes. That never happened. That's the state of our sad diet and what it's doing to the population, and it needs to end. And this isn't a short-term fix. This is a lifestyle that will put you in the driver's seat of your health. Until one day you square the curve, and by squaring the curve, I mean eventually we'll all pass on, but you want to go live, 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 live. Uh-oh, it's time, boom, and it's done. As opposed to live, 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 and go downhill and spend your last 10 years with procedures and medications because everything's falling apart. Isn't that dramatic? But it's true. Okay, I'm done. We're going to talk about circadian rhythm next. So on my next Facebook Live, we're going to talk about the value of circadian rhythm on every part of your body. I didn't know any of this, and I've been paying attention to Dr. Andrew Huberman. He has the Huberman Lab at Stanford, through the Stanford Medical Center, and he is a brilliant neuroscientist that's offering a lot of his training free online. You can even Google him and listen to him, and you'll hear me repeat, well, the things he says, because I'm not a scientist. I just pay attention to who has good ideas. It's time for me to go now. So I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you get something out of it. I know a lot of people pick it up after the live show is over. I don't see any comments, but I haven't really figured out how to use this thing that well. So I'm going to go, and have a great day, because I know I'm going to. Bye-bye.